Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of Super A to Z, or the Super A to Z show, or something else entirely. I don't know what. I don't really know what I'm doing. That will become evident as time goes on. My name's James, and I'm going to give this podcasting a go, although is it really a podcast? Because it's just me. There's no co-host. There is just ramblings into the void for half an hour to an hour, I suppose. And is that a podcast? Or is it just a voice note that I have committed to the internet for all to hear? I don't know. We'll see. Can it be a podcast if you have no listeners? We'll give it a go. So the idea of the show is I'm a huge fan of gaming. If you follow me on Blue Sky, you'll see I post a fair bit of Spectrum stuff. The Spectrum isn't actually my console of choice. It's not the console I grew up with. I'm fairly new to it. I was just very, very interested in all the artwork. I love the artwork of that era. I love the fact that some of them can look so incredibly professional, and then some of them don't just look like they were drawn by a teenager in their bedroom. They were drawn by a teenager in their bedroom. Game development was so different back then, but that's a whole different podcast. That's a whole different story. That's not what I'm here for. So yeah, Spectrum's fairly new to me. We did have a couple of older computers, home computer, Atari, but I grew up on the Super Nintendo. That was the first console I owned that was actually mine, and this show is my love letter to potentially my favourite console of all time, which explains the Super part of Super A to Z, but what about the A to Z part? I hear you all cry. Well, by hear you cry, I'm referring to the one person in 2038 that stumbled upon this thinking it's some sort of encyclopedia of superheroes. So the A to Z part is the gimmick, I guess, for the show. I plan to play every Super Nintendo game in alphabetical order, and each episode is going to be a semi-deep dive. I couldn't really call it a deep dive because I don't think I'm anywhere near professional enough to get hold of enough information to call it a deep dive. It's kind of like that bit in the swimming pool where it's not the shallow end, it's not the deep end, it's kind of like in the middle. Your feet are just about touching the floor, but the water's it's like on your lip and you just feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's kind of like the level of depth of my dive. So that's what I plan to do. There are some caveats. I'm not going to do one episode on FIFA 96 and then come back next week with an episode on FIFA 97. Sports franchises, FIFAs, Maddens, that sort of thing, I'll condense into a single episode. I'll play them all, but I will talk about them all in one go. I'm not really sure how I'll deal with it all yet, but I'll cross those bridges when I come to them. I don't really have a release schedule as such. It's not necessarily going to be weekly. Some games will be easy to do in that time, but other games, there's a lot of RPGs on the SNES. And I am an almost 40-year-old man who works 7 days a week. So this is very much a labour of love. This is very much a personal thing for me. And I'll try and get things out as often as I possibly can. But it just all depends on the game, really. If there are any multiplayer-focused games on the Super Nintendo, I know there's a lot of multiplayer games on the Super Nintendo, but games specifically multiplayer-focused, I don't have any friends. So I will look at them. Whether I'll bundle them into a single episode and talk about them, or maybe just mention them at the start of an episode, again, I don't know what I'm doing specifically with any of this. But also, just in general with these games, we'll cross those bridges when we come to them. That's what feels natural, how it goes. That's what I'm going to do. This is kind of like my audio database. I'm a big spreadsheet guy. So I've done these sorts of things in the past where I'll say, I want to play every first-person shooter on the PS1 or something stupid like that. And I'll spreadsheet it. And that's what I do. I make spreadsheets. So this is kind of like my own personal audio spreadsheet, but with a bit more depth. If I get a single listener along the way, then that'd be an absolute dream. And I hope you stick with me if you do, because it's gonna be fun. I think I'm gonna enjoy this. So anyway, I've talked more than enough about me and about this challenge, I guess, that I'm going to do. So without any further ado, I'm going to cue some intro music, and when I'm back, I'll get into the first game of this series. Three Ninjas Kick Back is the first game of the series. It came out in November of '94, developed by Malibu Interactive and published by Sony. Sony ImageSoft, but Sony nonetheless, so technically a first-party Sony game. So you can put it right next to your God of Wars, your Last of Us, your Uncharted, of course. It's a platform beat-em-up based on the movie of the same name. I've seen the box art for this game countless times, and I knew it was a movie tie-in to a Karate Kid-esque 90s family film. What I didn't know is it was actually the second film in an entire series of 4 films, all of which look like they get progressively worse, judging by their scores on IMDb. Not seen any of them. I did do a bit of research into the first one, just sort of the plot and that sort of thing. Now, going into this, I assumed it was going to be a Karate Kid knockoff, and one of the first things you see when you start the game is a fairly nice digitised version of what I thought was Mr. Miyagi, and I just assumed that they'd got Pat Morita, Morita, I think that's how you pronounce it, to play this character. But actually, the character in the movie is played by the legend that gave the Graboids their name, Victor Wong, who played Walter Chang in Tremors. I know. My defence, digitised pictures of people from movies in the SNES era can be a bit confusing at the best of times. But that was the first thing that came up, and that led me to believe even more that it was that Karate Kid knockoff. I mean, I think it is a little bit of a Karate Kid knockoff. The story of the game follows the A-plot of the film fairly closely. There's a whole thing about baseball in the film, supposedly. That doesn't really fit the 2D aesthetic. Victor Wong's character, Mori, is going to present a sacred dagger to the winner of a karate tournament. He won that karate tournament 50 years ago. And he heads off to Japan, ends up in hospital, and the kids, the titular ninja kids, come and take the dagger. They carry on the mission. All during this, there's a man named Koga, who Mori beat in the tournament 50 years ago, who is sending his thugs out to try and steal this dagger, combine it with some sort of samurai sword, and get a huge amount of power. That's the basic premise for the game. There's 5 worlds, but the worlds are called levels, but then the levels have multiple levels within them. It's a bit confusing. And it has some good variety of level types. They've got your standard sort of point A to point B, platforming sort of levels. There's exploration levels where you have to explore a fairly open sort of level looking for certain things to progress. There is a running away from a rolling rock level type, which comes up a few times, and a level that's still your basic platform but requires a bit of thought about where to go next. It's a little bit more open with, I guess, multiple directions, but there's only one way to go to actually complete the level. The graphics are solid. The sprites are really crisp, and it has some really nice design. The digitized images of the actors, like I say, it's Super Nintendo, so they are what you expect them to be, but they're crisp. They look good, and the music is so close to brilliant. The music was composed by Richard Joseph, who did music for games like Sensible Soccer, Megalomania, and the one thing that sticks in my mind, and this theme, this music has stuck with me for such a long time. He did Cannon Fodder. So incredible musician, worked on so many amazing games. The music in this game is really catchy. It's some really good stuff. You will hear some of it throughout this episode. The only downside is it loops a little bit early, so you hear that same segment of music over and over. And if a level can take a good few minutes to beat, then it does get a bit repetitive, but the hook of the music is brilliant. I just wish it was that little bit longer and more drawn out. So I mentioned earlier about the types of levels in the game. I do want to talk a little bit about the level design as a whole, because it's weirdly inconsistent. The first world is very, very basic, very simple, but it's a tutorial world, so it's kind of expected. The second world doesn't really advance much more onto that. But then the third is suddenly incredibly interactive. And it makes me think that this game essentially was built around, like they had ideas for this particular world. It's the hospital level. The boss for the hospital level is very, very striking, the design of the sprite, and that boss has its own level. It's the only boss in the game that has a level dedicated to it. And then prior to that, you're just working through the hospital, but it's got so much interactivity. You can knock enemies into electrical items and knock them out. You can drop hanging baskets on their heads to knock them out. There's enemies that drop things on you from above. They're sort of sat on top of bookcases and things, and if you get above them, you can knock them off. Even fighting across hospital beds, feathers come bursting out of the pillows as you're fighting across them, and it gives you a bit of a sense of hope for the levels afterwards, because you're thinking, okay, we're getting something here. We're getting something really quite good. After the hospital, it drops off again, and you're back outside, and suddenly there's no interactivity whatsoever again, and it's just a very basic level, very similar to before. There's quite a lot of thought that's gone into the design of the level itself. One of the levels is it's one of these exploration levels where you have to kind of work out which way to go, and there's these big hollow trees that you need to go into, and then you drop down through the tree and move on, and there is a little bit of thought there. So the design of the level itself is quite nice, but when you've just gone from this level that is, like I say, it's so interactive, there's so much there to sort of look at and to do, and then you've gone to this, and then the final world is going through this cave system, and again you've lost all interactivity, you've lost even the design of the level really has gone off, and it does seem as though the game was maybe designed sort of with the hospital in mind first. I think it might be quite an important part of the film, with it being the hospital that Maury goes to prior to the kids sort of getting involved in the story, and so maybe if I'd seen the film I could understand a bit more why it seemed like it was the main sort of set piece of the game. So yeah, it does seem strange to have the hospital being the third world, almost like the focal point of the game, and then your final world is almost a bit of a letdown in a way. The level's fine, but there's just not much to it. There's no depth there. There's no meat on the bones, which I think is kind of the overall situation with the game itself. There's no meat on the bones. It's very basic. It's very simple. There is a game there. There is a bit of fun to be had there, but it's not enough for it to be anything better than average. Just completely average. Sorry, I had to cut there. There was another massive motorbike going past the window. So talking of the time it takes to beat a level, the levels are timed, which is one of my big letdowns of the game. It doesn't really make a difference in terms of you don't feel much under pressure, especially not in the early parts of the game. But later on, there was one particular level that's an exploration level, and you have to collect golden orbs, and the time limit is really restricting. Especially at that point in the game, you are down to no lives, and I managed to soft lock myself with it because I was using save states, and yes, I am using save states. Another one of my slightly arbitrary rules, if I want to call it a rule. I mentioned earlier on, I work a lot. I don't have a huge amount of time, and I want to experience as much of these games as I possibly can. This is going to be a caveat aside story that's going to kind of take me away from the podcast a little bit here, but games from this era, motorbike again, games from this era were purposefully designed to be challenging, not in a Dark Souls way, but almost in an unfair way, but not necessarily unfair. Basically, these games can be completed in a very short amount of time. This game clocked in for me just under 2 hours. The developers obviously didn't want people to complete their game in that amount of time, because you rent it, you complete it, that's it, done. So they'd make the game particularly challenging. Life restrictions, you can cut back to the start of the game sometimes when you run out of lives, start of the level, start of the world, all that sort of thing. Now, I don't have time for that, and I want to enjoy or experience as much of the game as possible so I can talk about as much of the game as I possibly can. So I'm using save states. It just gets me through the game, and so with this particular moment, I save stated and didn't realise just how much of the level I had left. When the timer gets to 0, it takes off a chunk of your health every second after that. I had no lives left. I had no physical way of getting back to the end of the level. And so, yeah, I screwed myself and I had to go all the way back. So the time limit was frustrating, but I get it. I get the reason for it, and I know why it was there. I just don't think nowadays playing a game like that, the time it is necessary. And it was one of my sort of letdowns of the game, which up to this point the game has been surprising me. It has been really not. I did not expect anything from this game. It is a movie tie-in game from the 90s. They are not notoriously good, and I'm not saying the game was great, but I've been having fun with it. I've been enjoying it. So yeah, that was one of the letdowns. Now, with me enjoying this game, this is one of the reasons, one of the things that I wanted to do with this show. I am a firm believer that any game for the SNES could be someone's favourite. Everyone that owned a console had a different path than somebody else. Obviously, people played Mario Kart, Super Mario World, all the big staples, Link to the Past, that sort of thing. They were on everyone's radar. And I will play those in this show, in this period, when I get to them. But the other games, these ones, your Three Ninjas Kick Back, these little games that you would go to a second-hand shop, well, we wouldn't because it didn't come out in this country, but somebody would go to a second-hand shop and just pick it up on the off chance. And these are the games that really paved people's gaming journeys. Everyone played Mario, Sonic. Not everybody played this game, but somebody did. And there is somebody out there looking back, and nostalgia is a hell of a drug. And there are a ton of games that when I get to them, I will, without a doubt, rate higher than they should be because they're personal to me. And there are people out there that will look back on Three Ninjas Kick Back and think, shit, yeah, that was amazing. I love that. This game did have two-player. It had a two-player co-op campaign, essentially. And I will get into that in a little bit more depth in a bit. But there is no doubt in my mind that this could have been someone's favourite game. For me, on the SNES, Top Gear, it was a really basic and probably quite shit racing game. But me, my dad and my best friend would play the absolute hell out of it most days. And so a lot of people that title wouldn't even cross their mind when they think of the Super Nintendo. But for me, it's there. Every single time someone mentions Super Nintendo and I think Top Gear. And maybe someone out there thinks Three Ninjas Kick Back. Who knows? And what I'm getting at is this could be someone's nostalgia game. And I want to get into these with that in mind. And I can see it with this game. There might be some games that I get to and I'm just like, nah, there's no way. There is no way. But with this, I can see it. It's very basic. There's not much to it. The enemy types are repeated quite often. There's only a few throughout the game. The controls can be a bit awkward. There's a point where you need to stand on a pressure plate to raise this big block. Then you run over to it, crouch down to get through it before it comes back down. And I feel like they were going for like an Indiana Jones feel. You've got just enough time to grab your hat before it closes. Except the controls to crouch require you to stop moving completely. Hit down, then start moving, and you're moving at a much slower pace. Without a save state before that, I think I would have lost my shit a million times over as a kid. The game is short, as I mentioned. 1 hour and 52 minutes is what I clocked in at. With save states. And I understand, as a kid, despite the unforgivingness of the game, you still could have completed it in an evening if you really went to town on it, or if you had a friend to play it with. There are missed opportunities in the game as well. So I mentioned it was multiplayer, and you at the start you choose between one of the three ninja kids. Each one's got a different weapon. Literal children running around with a sword and some sai in 1994 was okay, apparently. They don't play any differently. They all have the exact same mechanics. There are some collectible weapons in the game, some throwable bombs and some mines that you can drop, but I almost forgot they even existed. And when I did try and remembered they existed and I tried to use them, I'd waste 3 of them just to get my aim in, like the throwing of these grenades. But all that said, going back to my original point, this could be someone's favourite because there's a game there. The 2-player co-op, which would have been a factor in making memories for people. There is fun to be had, and I did have fun with it myself, like 31 years later down the line. And I think this went under most people's radars, even at the time. And that leads me on to my next section. So this part of the show is where I try my absolute hardest to deep dive, there it is again, into the magazines of that era and see what was said about these games at the time. Sometimes it's going to be a lot easier. I'm not going to struggle to find reviews for Super Mario World or Link to the Past. This is one I did struggle with. Obviously I could just look at modern websites that have retro reviews. Easy, search YouTube and look at the videos discussing the game. But it's not really what I'm after. That's not what I want to see, and it's not what I want to bring to you, because, yeah, I say you, again, like I'm assuming someone's going to listen to this, but if someone listens to this, you could go to YouTube, you could go to these retro gaming websites so easily and just type 3 Ninjas in. Easy. I want to try and bring the real reactions from the time, because it's not quite such an easy thing to find. With this game, I found very little. As I've mentioned before, it's US only release, which narrows the search down to American magazines, which is fine. There's plenty of American magazines that I can scroll through. In one of the reviews I found, it mentioned the game being a rental exclusive, which is crazy to think of now, to have a rental exclusive, but these things did happen back then. Some games were exclusive to somewhere like Blockbuster, and you could only rent them, and they're worth so much more today because of it. This game is worth quite a lot now, which does lend a bit of credibility to that, but weirdly, the box art does not indicate that at all. Now, I've seen box arts for Blockbuster exclusive rentals and things like that, and they nearly always say something about that on the box, and there's nothing, so I don't know. I'm not too sure. I scoured multiple magazines. I found the game reviewed twice, mentioned twice. One mention was it being shown at the European Computer Trade Show prior to its release, which is weird because it wasn't released in Europe. And the other mentions I'd seen quite a few times across various magazines. It was advertised in a buy 2 get 1 free promotion for the Sega CD/Mega CD in this country. It was released on Genesis and Sega CD as well. It does make me think they were maybe quite desperate to get some copies moved. So, onto the reviews that I did find, both very short and, to be honest, pretty harsh. What is interesting about these is both reviews came out in magazines from March of 95. This game released in November of 94. So, a review coming out 4 months after the game release seems absolutely mad to me, and just goes to show how under the radar it was. I could maybe understand it if these were reviews in, say, UK gaming magazines and they were discussing the ports of it, something along those lines. But no, they were American magazines 4 months later. But what, again, a lot of the time I need to remind myself is everything was very different back then. I sound like, you get off my lawn sort of thing. Everything was very bit different back then. And even gaming publications. These magazines were run by teenagers. They wrote these reviews. They would have to, especially early days, obviously as the magazine got bigger and bigger and bigger, it was different. You know, they did get more respect. They would get review copies and things. But these guys had to buy these games. And so I guess they would buy it, and then it would be in a backlog, and they'd play it a few months down the line, and it didn't really matter because people weren't quite so. But with these magazines, in the 90s, these kids going out and becoming a bit of a collective and being like, let's do a magazine, let's get some games, let's review them, let's put it out there, we'll get it published. That was the 90s YouTube. It was the 90s podcast. these kids, these teenagers into young adults, this was their voice, and everyone can do that now. I am doing it as we speak, and I have, as you are very well aware, no experience whatsoever. Everybody can have a voice now, and back then it was so different. And yeah, these kids were just like, this is how we get our voice. We make a magazine, and so that's what they did. And so these are the 2 reviews that I found for this game. So this review is from issue 68 of GamePro magazine. It's fairly short, so I'll just read it. 3 Ninjas Kick Back comes from the silver screen to the SNES in this below-average platform adventure. As one of 3 ninjas, you must rescue your grandfather from mobsters. Most rental-only carts aren't good enough to sell, and this game falls into that category. Graphically, the backgrounds are passable, but the poorly depicted characters give 3 ninjas an 8-bit look. The good sound effects and music help carry the game. The best part is the simultaneous 2-player action. While the control is decent, trouble spots exist, like when you try to grab swinging ropes. Fans of the film might like it, but others should avoid these new ninja kids on the block. So, got one part wrong. You don't have to rescue your grandfather from mobsters. So you're supposed to be delivering a knife, and mobsters keep trying to steal it. And the best part being simultaneous 2-player action that I can't actually take part in. But that's what they think. Their ratings, I assume, out of 5 were graphics 2.5, sound got a 4, control 2.5, and fun factor 2.5. So not particularly well liked. Now, the second and the only other review I found is from a magazine cleverly titled Video Games. Again from the March 1995 issue. Again, very, very short, so I'm just going to read it. This sort of game is an insult to the intelligence of all thinking beings, but it must be reviewed. Does anybody actually care about a game adapted from a dismal movie like 3 Ninjas Kick Back? Hopefully not. That said, the game is your standard platform action with cutesy graphics that revolve around a trio of suburban ninja kids who say witty things like "let's kick butt." Been there, done that, ho-hum. So when is that Sony PlayStation coming out? Graphics 5. Ugly little ninja kids cavort. Sound/music 4. Can't say it made an impression. Playability 4. Not really. Overall rating weak 4. So yeah, that's interestingly though. Across the page, they reviewed it for the Genesis, and they said exactly the same thing, except they gave it a 5. The start of the review is exactly the same game as the SNES counterpart, but they gave it a 5. I don't know why. Maybe the music on the Mega Drive was slightly better. I'm not sure. But anyway, those were the reviews that I find. Both these reviews seem particularly harsh, but if the game cost maybe $50, $60, I could maybe quite understand it. But if it was rental only, like the GamePro magazine seems to say, then I think it would have been worth a look for a night or two. I just don't see... I don't see why it wouldn't have been considered a bit of fun. So yeah, I don't know. As much as I think the reviews themselves are harsh, I think the score of a 4 is fairly fair from that Video Games magazine. My rating that I gave it was 2.5 out of 5. Average, straight down the middle. Nothing offensive, nothing groundbreaking. That's it. There's not really much to say. My time with the game was fun. I enjoyed it for the most part. And I feel like I would recommend it. I don't know, maybe recommends are harsh. I think if you've got a couple of hours to spare, I think there's enough to have a bit of a look at, especially the hospital level. That was quite good fun. And yeah, very, very basic, but very simple. And that's kind of it, really. That is the game is complete. I am complete. My time with this game and this recording equipment, which I'm really still struggling to get my head around. This might sound absolute dog shit by the time I'm done. I don't know what these audio levels mean. I'm going to have a job editing it. We'll see. But I did have a really good time with this experience. Like, the game research, I loved researching the game, trying to uncover as much information from that time as possible. And I want to carry that on over onto as many episodes as possible. I don't necessarily think I'm going to get a huge amount of listeners. I imagine it probably is very dry, just listening to me talk about a game. But I am doing this because I enjoy it, and I have really enjoyed my time doing this. If one person comes along with me, as I said before, that's amazing. I fully welcome you to experience it all. There's going to be some really good highs, really, really low lows. As of the time of this recording, I don't really know when I'm going to upload this. I don't even know how to upload it. Like, I don't know anything about any of this. I might have already mentioned that. I don't know. But we'll see. I don't know if the platform I use will have comments or ratings, but if by some miracle someone has hung on to this point and you want to comment, you can do. Or you can find me on Blue Sky. I'm at Jimbo8E6. That's Jimbo, the number 8, the letter E, the number 6. Which is something I didn't really consider saying out loud when I made it 25 years ago. So yeah, find me there if you want. Let me know what you think. Tell me this sucks. Tell me it was great. Like whatever you want to do. If it sucks, tell me why. Maybe it's something I can fix. If it's great, that's good too. Tell me you like it if you're still here. As I've said, I don't have a set release schedule. I'm going to just see game by game. The next game is a game called The Seventh Saga, which I haven't played before, but I know is a fairly lengthy RPG. The SNES has a lot of them. So I've gone from this sub 2 hour game to a fairly extensive game, which I have started. I've started playing it. I'm fairly into it now, so maybe I'll be able to get another episode out in a week's time. I feel like I'll fall into a routine. I think it'll get better as time goes on. I mean, it can't get much worse, can it? But thank you anyway. If you're still here, if you are here, if anybody's here, thank you for sticking with me. If you did, have a great week. Look after yourself, and see you next time on Super A to Z, or the Super A to Z show, or whatever I end up calling it, if it's not either of those. Bye. So the Spectrum was fairly new. I had some older computers beforehand, but when I grew up, oh, you fucked it.